Welcome to, can you hear me? I still can't hear anything. So welcome to the City Council or the Planning Commission meeting for Monday, September 12th. We'll go ahead and start with the Pledge Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so still can't hear anything on my end.
Chair Padden, can you hear me?
If anybody's talking.
Chair Padden? Chair Padden, can you hear me?
Hello?
Please stand by.
I even have the fancy microphone with me tonight, so hopefully it sounds okay in the chamber.
This happened once before, somebody had turned the volume down on this laptop. We're all good.
Chair Padden, can you hear me? Chair Padden, can you hear me?
Talk. Don?
Chair Padden, can you hear me?
Talk. Don?
Chair
So
Padden,
the
can you hear
thing
me?
says that I'm viewing Don Hardy's screen. Would it, if Don unmuted himself, will that set everything on fire or? Okay,
Jason, we've got, everything is good here. You want to call on the phone? We're going to have a direct line of communication. Make sure his volume isn't like muted or something, or,
Can send him up.
hello again.
Chair Padden, can you hear us?
no.
Huh?
Can you hear us?
Well, sure, I can hear you, but the problem is if these new phones don't have a thing that you can connect a set of headphones to. And if I put the phone on speaker, it's going to pick up through the microphone and then there's going to be reverb. And I don't feel like holding the phone up to my ear for the next 2 hours.
I think it's something on his end, because we've got good audio here.
Can you do hands-free with that, Jason?
What was that?
Can you do hands-free with the?
He wants to know if you can do hands-free, but that's what you just said.
Okay.
Well, I am not fancy and I don't have wireless earbuds for my phone. Otherwise, I could probably try to do that, but I don't have those. I only have a pair of wired headphones. And the phone would have to be put like, when the person was just talking, I could kind of hear them, but not very well. So I don't know where you would put the phone in order to pick everything up.
And your volume's all the way up, I'm assuming you've checked?
Is your volume all the way up?
On my computer, I did a sound check on my computer before this because I wanted to make sure, pardon me. I wanted to make sure that I had everything correct because I'm using this microphone and I'm using the headphones, and the headphones were working with audio on the computer, and obviously the microphone is working because I had to turn the computer so that it wasn't using the microphone headset, it was using the speakers and the microphone, or the headphone jack.
Why would he need his phone if he has speakers?
Jason, can you hear me now? Nope.
I can hear you through Laney's phone.
I mean, because I'm getting it here and I'm getting a level here when you're talking on that mic.
Every time.
I motion to sign language for him.
Test.
Coming in here when you're
I
talking on
have
that mic.
speakers on my computer, but I'm using this
I
microphone.
motion
that my
to sign
phone gave
language
me
for him.
Test.
because it's a better quality microphone so that it isn't so scratchy there in the chamber. I could try unhooking the microphone and doing it the old fashioned way.
Try it.
Okay. Well, what do you know? Hold on a second. Your default, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, good Lord. See, that's what you get for trying to use this fancy crap. Okay, Laney, I'm hanging up from you. See, I have this fancy microphone and everything that's in like a R4 hurricane resistant case, and a bunch of good that did me. Just a second, people.
I'm on, please, bring it back.
Okay, sounds good.
Screw those things as well. Okay, so with that,
So Chair
we'll
Pat,
go from here. So to get back on track, we'll move into item number 2, which is our consent agenda. I will entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda item.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Jarosh, seconded by Commissioner Calkins, to approve the consent agenda consisting of item DR 22-06 thermoglass final reading, and item draft planning commission minutes from our January 24th, 2022 meeting. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? The consent agenda passes unanimously. Okay. With that, we will now move into our work session portion of the meeting. Bear with me while I bring this up. Skim you over here. Okay. The purpose of tonight's work session is to give the Planning Commission the opportunity to discuss preliminary tree ordinance and conditions. To make the most of the short time we are given for these meetings, public comment will not be taken at work session meetings. This is appropriate under Oregon Public Meetings Law. Instead, we invite public comment at all the Planning Commission regular meetings under either of the 2 opportunities dedicated on each agenda for public comment. In addition, we invite the public to contact city staff with comments or concerns. Although this is a public hearing, the Planning Commission cannot make any formal decisions in a work session. Next step actions are often determined for deliberation and discussion at a properly noticed Planning Commission meeting. So with that, we will begin our work session. And I believe we're going to hand it over to Don to give us a presentation, and I will now mute myself.
Good evening, Chair Patton and Commissioners. Tonight we have a work session on the tree ordinance discussion. Just wanted to give a little framework for this discussion, and I'll go into a little more detail. This has been in general discussed with City Council as a way to do some advisory fact-finding on tree ordinance issues and considerations around a tree ordinance. The city currently does not have a tree ordinance. This is something that is being considered, and if the council were to take that directive from Planning Commission, what this would look like. Tonight we are looking for direction from the Planning Commission on the parameters of a tree ordinance. It would seem like every tree ordinance would be the same, not so much. Every jurisdiction does it differently, and we've done comparatives between a number of similar sized jurisdictions in Oregon. I'm also familiar with the tree ordinance in Southwest Washington, specifically for the city of Vancouver. So part of this discussion, I think, just as a framework, is leading into the comprehensive plan update, which is up and coming. A natural discussion for that comprehensive plan update will be related to trees and tree preservation in the environmental section of the comprehensive plan. So the timing, and I'll go into some of this later in the discussion, but just on the timing of the comprehensive plan, which I think is going to be helpful, is we're out for a request for proposal right now, and the submittals are due next Monday, September 19th. Interviews are planned on October 19th. Selection and by the council and scope of service approval is anticipated November 16th. First reading, second reading is anticipated December 7th, so that we would launch a consultant to move this forward. Not to really focus, there's other elements besides the tree ordinance that the comprehensive plan will obviously address, but it does fit well into that sequence and that discussion. Part of the discussion tonight is framing this in relation to council goals and objectives, and also other goals and objectives which relate back to the comprehensive plan. So just with that, and I also just, before we get too far along here, I would like to introduce Emma Poricolo, our new associate planner. Really thrilled to have her here. She's been very helpful in this discussion and research, and she's got the technical data on the research she's done on these comparative jurisdictions. So we'll be tapping her significantly as we get into if we get into detailed questions. So again, I kind of just framing this up here. I think the main purpose really is to talk about the elements that the tree ordinance may have in it. And we have comparative jurisdictions that we've looked at: City of Sherwood, Oregon City, Beaverton, Tualatin, Sandy, and Milwaukee. And so those are the jurisdictions we've considered. So getting back into the council define a number of objectives for 2022, and part of that is our belief as a tree ordinance should be reflective of these objectives. And these include things like housing and employment needs over the next 20 years, affordable housing, inclusionary zoning, expectations for lands annexed into the city and brought into the urban growth boundary. And when updating the comprehensive plan, we'll obviously, as I mentioned, need to consider whether or not trees should be part of the environmental section of the chapter in the comprehensive plan. The city council, again, will need to weigh in on this as we go forward, but tonight is, again, trying to frame this up so that they have a better idea of this. There could be a joint session. I'm not sure what that looks like exactly. Some of that depends on what I hear tonight from you folks, but that would be the next move, would be to work session this with council. So again, there's a wide range of these tree ordinances in various jurisdictions. There's aspirational elements to some of these cities. Most of them don't have it necessarily quantified in terms of a precise unit count. Sandy does have a unit count. They're talking about 3 trees and 3 trees on an acre of land. That would be 11 inches in diameter. Other jurisdictions are talking about canopy coverage And that would be something that they've looked at as, what should that be? Those are some elements there. And then others are even less, it's more like there has to be a special tree to even be preserved. So there's a pretty wide gamut of these cities and how they've treated that. So again, kind of moving to the next section of this is defining the specifics of where this would apply. This is one of the questions that we have. I would say that most jurisdictions do not apply this to existing developments as much as they do to development that is happening. That is a big question because that would end up regulating things differently if you were regulating individual trees on individual properties. That's something that I think is as an option, but my belief is the focus would largely be on future developments and addressing that. That would, again, that's for discussion. So part of that is looking at things that would be exempt. Would they be existing, say residential and commercial and industrial developments? Would there be exemptions for things like affordable housing? Those are options that would be part of this. And then what size of development? And these are all thresholds that each jurisdiction has to define in terms of a tree ordinance. Most of them, I would say, the minimum size is usually 1 acre. So if that development would have to be at least 1 acre in size to be regulated. Again, another part of the discussion. The standards do need to be clear and objective, and I think that's one challenge with this is that it may be slightly easier to do unit count, tree unit count, than it is to do canopy coverage on a piece of property, just from a pragmatic standpoint. There are issues with development restrictions. Essentially, clear and objective standards mean that they have to be clear and objective and achievable. Otherwise, we get into proportionality issues and taking issues, which essentially means that if you regulate a piece of property so it can't be developed, the city would be likely taken to task on that legally and could end up essentially losing that battle by over-regulating land development. Oregon, again, has a very strong focus on land development rights, and clear and objective standards are the state of where things are at in Oregon. So that kind of gives a framework there. Part of the discussion is dealing with tree unit counts. If there are unit counts or canopy coverage items, the question becomes, what are the outs for a developer to, let's say they do want to cut the trees down on a piece of property, should there be a fee in lieu for those trees? And depending on the tree unit count, let's say hypothetically we're requiring between 10 and 30 tree units an acre, and you decide to cut all the trees down, there would be a cost fee in lieu for each tree. Typically that's $250. That's not an exact number, but then that would be the cost that would be part of that process, with the concept that that money would be banked by the city. The city would then plant trees with that money on public land. So the concept really is, yes, you're losing trees, but essentially the city's planting them on public property. It's not exact clarity in the state law on how long you can hold the funds. It's not indefinite before you have to use them. And it's also not clear how many of these units, these tree units or trees, would have to be planted each year, depending on whether developers decided to pay into the fee in lieu. That's still not understood. So for example, it depends on what the standard would be, but there could theoretically be quite a large number of trees being planted each year if people are all paying fee in lieu, depending on the tree unit count that would be required. Some jurisdictions have not done fee in lieu, and they've just basically come up with the standard saying you need to do a certain size of trees like Sandy, three trees at least 11 inches in diameter of breast height. That's another way to go about this, but if there were a standard with fee in lieu, that would be something to consider, and what should that be? So part of what we're looking tonight from the Planning Commission, again, starting point in this discussion is what kind of developments types would this apply to? Would these be, subdivisions, design reviews, which you folks review, commercial and industrial design reviews? What would the standard requirements be? Would there be a unit count that would be required, or a canopy percentage that would be required? Should preserving large trees be a focus? Should preserving heritage trees, which are associated with historical landmarks properties, be part of that? I don't know if there's a large number in the city that relate in that category, but it's a question. One? Okay, yep. So we have one tree. And then there's other criteria for determining tree preservation and retention, and then what kind of activities would be exempt. So these are all part of that discussion. Part of some consideration, again, are city staffing implications. I've had general conversation with our public works director, and he was in favor of, if we had a fee in lieu program to plant additional trees. What the capacity of the land is to absorb all those trees over a certain amount of time is unknown. We just don't have that quantified. And how will the standards meet other council goals and objectives? Some of this obviously relates to housing affordability. So there's elements with that as well. And so, again, we're going to get into more of that discussion with council. There'll be a reporting out of the Housing and Economic Advisory Committees. There'll be a reporting out on October 19th, which will talk about objectives surrounding that. But obviously trees have a value to them on properties, but depending on what the standard is, it could end up influencing the cost of development. And then obviously a need for additional stakeholders. This is like the beginning of this process. We want to make sure that all stakeholders were essentially given a voice here in this process. Again, kind of leading into the comprehensive plan discussions and how we shape that. I could see that being a group that would not only address tree issues, but there could be an advisory group that addresses other issues besides that as well. Those have not yet been formed, but it's part of that overall discussion. So I've got some space here for some questions, and then I'll jump back to that. But again, the next step would be, taking your input tonight, framing this up, going back to council with the work session. Planning Commission may or may not be involved in that work session, depending on what happens tonight. And then essentially moving that forward in direction. I would recommend that, since we are going through the comprehensive plan update anyway, that this is a good opportunity for us to have a broader discussion around that would capture that discussion. Ultimately, a tree ordinance would be before you in some sort of form to be reviewed and recommended to the council for adoption. It's kind of the direction I'm seeing this go. Again, up to the council's discretion about where they want to go with this as well. There's a lot kind of here. It seems like tree things would be rather simple. They're not really that simple, because it really comes down to the uniqueness of each community and what we aspire to be. But I think it's an important element in our comprehensive plan. The city of Canby is not under the same regulatory provisions as the other cities in Metro. That being said, I think the whole issue of climate change is an important one, and that would relate to the comprehensive plan, and trees are a part of that. I do have some slides here. These are really hard to read. We've not done an inventory of what the canopy base in Canby is. but there's a north and south. I mean, you can see kind of, it's hard to see this a little bit on this these slides, but this kind of gives you an idea of where remaining trees are and trees that are in neighborhoods that have been planted. Again, I don't know what the baseline is for where Canby's at, but it does give you kind of a sense of what the tree vegetation situation is. I think that in particular, one thing perhaps to keep in mind is the areas that have not yet been developed, and some of them are rather heavily forested. So that would be a consideration in this process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Planning Commission for questions and discussion.
Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and go through the list here, and we'll start, to keep some order here, we'll go ahead and we'll start with Commissioner Jarosh.
Okay, I have a list. Well, some of my background or framework is just from having lived in Lake Oswego for 20 years. They have a very restrictive tree ordinance, and there are some good things about it and some not so good things about it, but it made me think of some questions. You know how some cities are, I don't know, they're certified tree cities? I don't know who does that. Are any of the cities we looked at certified tree cities?
They are, and my understanding on that is it's somewhat programmatic in terms of you have to have a tree ordinance and meet certain criteria.
Okay.
I didn't get the sense, and other folks can correct me, that meant that because you were a certified tree city that you were somehow superior to another city. I'm just putting words out there, but I
Okay.
mean, I'm just saying, I don't know if it really quantitatively means.
Not a lot of meat to it.
It means you've gone through a process, you're preserving trees. How well are you preserving trees is perhaps
Okay.
a question mark.
Okay.
I mean, if you're looking at a score of 10 is like preserving 90% of the trees versus a score of 30%, they both may theoretically meet the standard. So again, that's my very large macro perspective on that.
Okay. I just wonder, we don't have to talk about it, but if there is a place that's a tree city, are their ordinances more restrictive around trees? I have no idea, so.
And I've just found, part of this is, I just found it unique because I was, kind of very familiar with Southwest Washington regulations, and they all decided to do it the same way. I found Oregon to be very, very unique in that every jurisdiction is doing it differently.
Okay.
So it was very unusual. I mean, just kind of like, I was questioning, and again, this comes down to preference, and this is your city, this is, going forward, what should this look like? And I think part of this is, even having the conversation around this, I think is important in the sense of kind of trying to provide some direction around it.
Okay, thank you. The other question that came up is in Lake Oswego, if you want to cut a tree down, whether it's dead or alive, you have to apply for a permit and pay for the permit. So they don't call it a fee in lieu, and I have no idea what they do with the permit money, but it's just a permit like any other permit.
And I would say that, and I'm familiar with Lake Oswego because I was on the consulting side of things in Lake Oswego. We did several projects there. I'm very familiar with that process. That's an option to be considered here is, do you really want to regulate somebody's ability or non-ability to remove trees on existing property that has trees on it? That's one lens. Mm-hmm. Not every jurisdiction has done that. Some of them, it's just new development, new subdivisions, new commercial development, new industrial development. That would have an implication if we ended up putting in a fee and a regulatory process for every person that wants to cut a tree in the city of Canby. That would have a staffing implication.
Yeah, right.
So, and that's
it was
something, yeah.
Trees of a certain circumference. I don't remember what the number was, but
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just
Right.
recognizing that would be somewhat akin to having a fence permit process, which we're talking not tonight about, but similarly, it would involve more work, et cetera.
I guess I don't understand why that would be more work than a fee in lieu, because we're just trusting they would tell us?
The fee in lieu would be basically for new development. So versus a home that's built that has trees on
Right.
it and they want to cut a tree down on their property, then their home is already built.
Right, I guess I'm not probably getting it the right. So if we said just for new development, but we said permits instead of fee in lieu, then are we less restricted on how we spend it? You know what I'm saying? If we're wondering, can we absorb putting all those trees in elsewhere, then can we just use a permit process for new development?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's, there either could be a standard established with no fee in lieu, or there could be a fee in lieu. There needs to be some way to allow flexibility, to allow development to happen without
Right.
prohibiting it. Fee in lieu gives somewhat of an option for that. So the standard spectrum, as I see it, is if you have a standard that is not achievable, but no fee in lieu, that's problematic. So it really depends on what the baseline requirements will be in terms of, like, if we're looking at canopy or how many trees per acre is required. I don't know if you're understanding that or not, but the more specific development standards we have on how many trees there are on a piece of property, that will influence how much development can happen on a piece of
Right.
property, how expensive that property development will be.
Right.
And so I think a lot of jurisdictions have decided the fee in lieu is a way to give an out to say, yes, it's not pragmatic, but we'll pay into the fund, which essentially in concept gives a one-to-one replacement. Essentially, you lose a tree, it gets planted somewhere else. Arguably, part of that calibration is how big is the tree, and then, is it a one-for-one, or do you do a matrix like in Southwest Washington where a tree that's 20 inches in diameter is, let's say, 12 tree units value? How you structure that is going to be an important factor.
Yeah, my question is really administrative, so if we collect $50 for a fee in lieu versus $50 for a permit, does that give us more option on how that money is spent as a city?
And I'd say that it would,
Okay.
I'd say that it would be focused to answer your question, it would help focus that on replacement versus process.
Okay,
So that, yes, I would say if the focus is on preservation, and also to your point, and I'm sorry if I skip past that we could require a fee in lieu. I mean, I guess the question is, do we require a permit and fee in lieu for somebody trying to remove a tree on their own property that's already built, that's developed?
right.
And that's
I
the question.
think, if I may, and Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, what I think you're getting at is, if we go with a fee in lieu, we end up with a bank of money that we are more restricted to use.
Right.
So instead of saying for a new developer, you have to pay a fee in lieu for each tree, if we say you have to pull a permit to cut down each tree, we collect that permit money. It goes into a pot that is less restrictive and can be used for other things like planting the annual hanging baskets on Main Street, or planting a perennial garden in the parks, or something along that lines. It helps by calling it a permit instead of a fee in lieu. It helps free up that restriction. Is that where you are going?
Yes.
Okay. Does that make sense, Don?
I think we've never done what you described in terms of like
Like
taking a
Oswego
permit
does.
fee and like putting it into a B account, basically. That's not to say that couldn't occur, but that's normally if you're paying a permit fee, it's going into the fund that funds the planning department in general. We're not defining that I'm not sure how easy that would be structurally to do that. I mean, I think it actually may be more difficult to earmark it for trees if it's a permit fee versus a fee in lieu.
That's not what we're saying, though.
Okay.
It doesn't need to be earmarked if it's a permit. That's what
Yeah,
we're saying.
yeah, no,
It does not.
Yes, okay.
Okay. And, we don't need to belabor this, but the problems that in Lake Oswego, as I saw it anyway, was you had to pay a fee if your tree was dead or alive. And that was annoying. It's like, oh, you have one of those brown 300-foot cedar trees, so $250, please. So that was kind of challenging.
And I guess, just one other observation about the process. We would want this to be something that was done relatively quickly. I mean, in terms of, in my opinion, and again, I would say that, or concurrent with whatever development is happening, if somebody probably doesn't want to wait 2 months to remove a tree, for example, if it was a situation where it was on a single-family home.
Right. Like Oswego was quick, but I don't know how many people they had to do it. But yeah, they would send somebody out, but it wasn't a forester. It was just a person in the.
What I'm getting to is I think there may be noticing requirements as well in Lake Oswego.
There are, depending on the size of the tree, yes.
Yeah, and it's nothing as easy
Yes.
in my experience, and so we need to
Yes, no,
keep
there
that
were.
in mind here in Lake Oswego.
Yeah, the only difference was they had a specific situation for, I forget what they called it, like dangerous trees. So we had a tree that was being uprooted and it was leaning, and they gave us a permit in 1 day.
Sure,
So
yeah,
that kind of thing was an exception, but you're right. There were challenges around that noticing because it pitted neighbors against neighbors, and it was hard for some people. Okay, what about, so just a what if, because I've seen this happen too, you probably have too. If a developer comes in and they remove everything and they're not supposed to, is there a fine that's part of the process?
Part of this is, you mean after the fact, that because obviously they'd have to reveal what they're doing, and we have all the leverage all the way through occupancy permits on these. So
Okay.
I would say that if somebody, more to the point, I think if somebody were to go in and say, yeah, I'm preserving these trees, and then they go get cut down, that's a great question. Should there be some sort of covenant running with that property if you're going to save the trees versus paying to a bank?
Right.
And some of the jurisdictions have done some covenants that are recorded with the land that have, some remediation issues. In my personal experience, I've not seen that happen, except in very unusual circumstances where that's not been my experience. I don't see this as, where somebody's going to arbitrarily go in and, typically there's thought processes behind saving trees because you're relocating structures, your design layout has changed. And then what's the value of just going in and removing those after you've spent all that time saving it and setting it aside versus not?
I think you're more trusting than I am. The fact that we're seeing developers put fences in the wrong place causes me a little angst about, are they really gonna, if they're supposed to save a certain number of units or trees, what if they don't? And that did happen in Lake Oswego more than once, but that's a different kind of town. They just said, screw you, we'll pay the fee, whatever it is, we don't care. We don't care.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Do we have a list of trees, of approved varieties for our town? I don't think I've ever seen one.
We don't, and that's a great question.
Okay.
I think that would be another piece of this is, part of this is when we're talking about tree units, and maybe I should be specific about that, we're not talking about small seedlings. We're talking about a tree that's probably 1 or 2 inches at breast height.
Right.
So these are not small trees. I think, though, getting to that point, many jurisdictions do have approved tree lists. And that's something that absolutely could be added to this. Some of those there was a reason for those species in some ways. Some of them yield better crowns, and some of them are more habitat friendly. And speaking of that, the one thing I did not hit on is Oregon white oak is a protected species, and that's a slightly different scenario than a regular tree. Not to say that, I'm differentiating, but on a state level, there are trees that do have certain protections for them, and that's something that I would say if we're going to do a tree ordinance, that should be part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Don.
Oregon white oak.
The city does have an approved tree list.
Oh, it does,
Okay.
okay.
Okay,
Yes, and it's divided up by small, medium, and large trees. That's all the trees that are planted out in the industrial park were part of a program where they planted a lot of those trees out there from the list. So if people wanted to see what that tree would look like when it was more mature, they could drive through the industrial park and look at it. Unfortunately, most of those trees died because they weren't maintained. But there is, in fact, an approved tree list or recommended tree list by the city.
okay, thank you. So,
Then I have one more final.
Yeah, please, yeah.
So we talked about the fairgrounds being outside the city limits, but they're under jurisdiction. So if we decided to make this for both existing development and new development, would we be able to control the tree changes at the fairgrounds?
the fairgrounds actually is in the city limits.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay,
So if, and this again, that would be new development.
okay,
And so that's not going to be exempt.
okay.
If you're frozen and you're done, it's one scenario where you either have a business or a home. That would be one scenario. And like, should that be regulated or not? Meaning that like that development's completed versus development that changes over time or is, so any new development I would say would be fair game for a tree ordinance.
Oh, I see, okay. The one thing, I guess, when I lean strongly toward both existing development and new development. The reason for that is if you look at like a development that was created 15 years ago and it was farmland, so there were no trees and very few trees planted, and then the homeowners could take them out, those neighborhoods don't look very good. And, they're not shady and they don't, do much for our climate. So, and I see that more in like Tigard and Tualatin and places where they're just, 20 years in, there are no trees in their subdivisions. It looks terrible, sad. And that's because there were none to begin with, because they built on farmland, so I wonder.
And I think as a starting point, that would be, the interesting part of that discussion on the fee in lieu is if the starting point is if you don't have trees, you have no credits. And so therefore you're paying full value unless, you're somehow planting trees in a subdivision. So if you have a 20-acre piece of land that's essentially a field, you would either plant trees to meet the tree ordinance, or you would pay the full value for that into the bank for the city to plant trees elsewhere.
Okay.
It's actually valuable that kind of the idea behind it is that would be helping to kind of reproduce trees that weren't in existence. I think more specifically, if they're, I think where people really have concerns is where you have a forested setting and then suddenly there's
Right.
no forest at all.
Right.
And there really wasn't any thought put to like saving anything on the property.
What about for parks, city parks? Does it apply?
City parks, well, they're probably not going to be removing trees, I'm guessing, unless they're diseased or dying. I'm not seeing that. That would be a question, though. It's a great question. Should we exempt public land, maintenance on public lands? I would assume that parks would not be removing trees that were unnecessary.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So just maybe, because I've thrown a lot at you guys, but maybe just going through this, so if maybe the list on development applicability, wanted to get your thoughts. These are the key items: development applicability, standard specific requirements, dealing with your suggestions on that. Preserving large trees, I have that as an option. One of those might be sensitive species of trees, preserving heritage trees, and then any other thoughts on retention or preservation, and then what should be exempt. So that would kind of go to the development applicability. So just wanted to get your thoughts on those.
Okay, Don, so the read that I just got from you is you want specific sort of like yes or no temperature tests on that list of items that you just read off. Is that correct?
Yeah, and this is the beginning of the discussion, and I know this is a lot to kind of digest, but just, I want to, yeah, exactly. What are
Okay.
people's thoughts?
What-
Do people like or dislike? I mean, I would really be helpful to understand maybe a survey of like concerns, non-concerns. That would be maybe a starting point before we even get into the specifics, but that might be helpful.
Okay, so how about this? How about we take that list that you just read off, and each commissioner can say, like, so what was the first one?
First one is development applicability. Where does it apply?
What do you mean? Like, where do we want
So this
this
would
tree
be-
ordinance to apply to? Do we want
Yeah.
it to apply to new development or existing development?
Exactly, that's exactly right.
Okay, so if that's the case, why don't we do this? Commissioner Jarosh, do you want it to apply to one, the other, or both?
Both.
Commissioner Ellison,
New.
new only.
Correct.
Commissioner Ewert,
I would say both with parameters.
okay? Commissioner Calkins,
Yeah, it's, unlike with fences where we had we already had an existing code that people aren't following, and I would like to go back to some of these things. It's hard for me to be, if we didn't have the ordinance before, to go back and say, well, now you have to do. So although I want more trees, if I'm following like what we've done and to be in the spirit of that, I'd have to say new.
okay? And for me, I would say we need to start with new and then develop plans for down the road how we phase this into existing. Because there is so much existing and there's going to be less and less new, because we don't have a whole lot of land that's going to be brought into the city that's in the current urban growth boundary. And what we do bring in the future is going to be limited based on the rural reserve. I think we should start with new and then work towards how we are going to get trees on existing developments. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay,
So where's the consensus for
Whoops.
Don then?
what?
So what's the consensus then for Don on that point?
And
I think it's a mixed bag.
I don't know, we're not seeking plurality of opinion. I mean, it's just good to have a range because I think the council's also going to struggle with some of these, to be honest with you. But it's helpful, these are starting to let us, your input we can narrow this down in terms of that. Yeah.
But Don, when we dropped some trees on our property, we still had, a permit exists currently. There's just not a fee for one. I had to fill one out.
For removing.
On an existing property.
For street trees, or was this on?
I had two, yeah. So I wanted to remove one or two in the front, but it was out of the budget. So I had to get a permit for those, but I had two that were on property in the back of the property, and I filled out a permit for those as well. Now, maybe there was a misunderstanding, but.
Okay. And that, let us dive into that. I know street trees are completely regulated, that removal of that. Typically I think associated with grading, we may have tree issues for on-site private property, but I am not aware of.
And when you say street trees, mine are within 15 foot of the curb on my property.
And the challenge is in Canby, we have like right away, and then there's some
Right.
utility easements. It's not like always crystal clear, like where is that supposed to be? So within that confine of the utility easement and the right of way, that street tree could be anywhere in there.
Gotcha.
So they probably were street trees, and therefore you needed a permit for that. So. But I'm not aware of, like, on private property that we have a current permit. I may be mistaken, but I don't believe, unless it's associated with grading, that we have a tree removal permit for private property. Okay. Okay.
So Don, I think what might be good in going through these questions like this is if you take your question and say, 3 commissioners said yes to all, 2 commissioners said yes to just new development, and give that to the city council, it will give them an idea of sort of what the temperature is from this group. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. And that's a summary that what you just said is perfect.
Okay, excellent. So now what was the next question on your list?
Next question is standard specific requirements, which, and again, let me help you with that. That would be the full gamut of range between only regulating certain numbers of trees on property, private property, and regulating how many trees are supposed to be on that property based on a specific numeric count. That's A. B would be a tree unit requirement across a piece of property that would end up resulting in a different formula and would end up resulting in likely a fee in lieu if someone wanted to remove more than what was required. So there's kind of 2 scenarios there. One is just, for example, some of our comparative jurisdictions were just basically you had to have 3 trees, they had to be a certain size, and that was it. There was no fee in lieu. And then the second one would be if you took a jurisdiction and then made it slightly different than that and said, well, there is a certain tree count, and I'm not asking for a tree count tonight, but are you in favor of are you in favor of a fee in lieu, I guess is the question, or a specific numeric standard only for the tree ordinance?
Okay, so let me make sure I've got this correct.
Is this for new?
The options are number of you want to regulate the number of trees or with no fee, or you want to regulate the number of trees with a fee. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's pretty much a breakdown. Yep.
Hey,
And this
Don,
is for new
can I-
development?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, please.
I was going to complicate this a little bit more.
Let's not do that because it's clearly not.
Well,
Go ahead.
So a lot of the jurisdictions that I reviewed, there was fee in lieu option, but there was also a mitigation option. So replanting, 2 times the DBH that you removed. So a mitigation via replanting on that site, and then or fee in lieu.
Which I think is, thank you, Emma, that's great. And that, you see this a lot in environmental mitigation, and so that's a concept that's taken from that, which is, okay, there's a formulaic way of like, okay, you either pay into a fund or there's a certain number of species that you have to replace on site, which gives the equivalent of what's been lost, but it's still a formula, but you're not having to pay, you're planting basically. You're planting to make up for the trees you've removed.
Sure. So the options are no fee, fee in lieu, or fee in lieu with credits towards mitigation.
Yes, and I think, and not to make it more complicated, but like there could be a combination of these as well.
Okay, we can handle that. So does everybody understand the options? We have no fee, we have fee in lieu, and fee in lieu with mitigation. Commissioner Jarosh, what is your pleasure?
Fee in lieu with mitigation.
Any other options?
No.
Commissioner Ellison,
Fee in lieu with mitigation, but some flexibility on the mitigation because the constraints of the property might not allow for 5 times the plantings for the one. I mean, if it's a thick forested area. So I kind of like the idea that Don had brought up earlier about designated areas throughout the city to replant. In addition,
Okay.
as an option.
okay? Commissioner Ewert,
This is deja vu for me. Back in the early 90s, we went through all of this. And we actually had a crew of about 12 people that went through and counted every tree in Canby. That was I think it was 6 inches and larger. Documented, filed, went through. I have no problem with tree ordinance. I was for it then, I'm for it now. But it is a very, very interesting can of worms. And I would say that in response to your question that you're asking here right now, to have folks to have skin in the game, I would say that the fee in lieu idea did not come up back in the early 90s. That's an option that I would explore, but you've got a wide range of, a tree ordinance is not a simple thing. And it covers a lot of stuff. So I would say the fee in lieu sounds like maybe something that would work, and but there's going to need to be some mitigation. There's going to have to be some specific situations. So that's where
Okay.
I come down on it.
Commissioner Calkins.
Oh boy, here we go. I am totally against the fee in lieu. I'm against the fee in lieu for our traffic and our roads, and I'm against it for our trees. I will make it my hill to die on forever as long as I'm on Planning Commission. I don't agree with the fee in lieu. I've sent many annoying emails to staff about the fee in lieu, trying to find out where the money goes. As far as I've learned, it just goes into a general fund. It's not restricted. And then the budget comes, and I observed the budget meetings. You were there, Jason, but and the money doesn't go. I'm not convinced that the money would go to replant trees. We know how government works. I don't know where those trees will go. And I am against the fee in lieu. What I would be for is what I personally did. I had a large tree that the roots were intruding into the sewer line. We had to unfortunately get rid of it. I replanted 3 in other areas in its place. I'm interested in that kind of idea in those situations. For new development, definitely against the fee in lieu as the way to get them out of, planting trees for some reason. I agree with Commissioner Jarosh. I know there's a particular newer development in town where it doesn't seem like they planted any trees. I feel like I'm in Hemet, California. When I go there, sometimes it doesn't feel like the garden spot.
Right.
So I just want to say, as far as the fee in lieu goes, I think maybe for an R1 area of a single family home, pre-existing for many years, I could see that as being an idea. I don't like it for like newer developments at all, coming in and trying to pay a little bit of money to get out of growing trees. So I will say, did I miss anything on that, on your points?
You've got
Or is that good?
mitigation, but no fee in lieu, Chris?
That's where I'm at, for sure.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
Can I
And then for me,
Can I ask
I
a
would-
question real quick?
yeah,
So is this, what we're talking about here tonight, is that outside of our street tree ordinance that we have in place? This is
in addition to that. And so there's another question perhaps even added onto this list. And some jurisdictions do give credit for street trees. They may not give full credit. They may give partial credit. They may give 50% credit. So there's another element to this as well, which we need to consider as well. But
we're going to make that a separate question.
that's a separate question, and that's another level of detail that perhaps let's get through this first round, but that's another question.
Okay. For me, the answer to this question is fee in lieu with mitigation, but with the following thoughts. There should be a minimum requirement for preservation of trees on wooded lots. They cannot just pay a fee to get rid of all the trees. They have to try, I would love to see something where they have to keep a certain number of trees on the lot, and then if there's above that allotment, then they can pay a fee to cut those trees down. The other thing that I think is with the fee in lieu, what Commissioner Calkins was saying, there needs to be parameters set on what that fee can be used for, so it can be used for other greenery within the city, and there needs to be an annual report showing where that money is being spent, similar to the street maintenance fee. We track where the street maintenance money goes. We know it's going towards streets. There has to be a way that we can do that with this fee. So that's my thoughts on that one.
Thank you, Chair Patton. And just, I don't want to dive too deep on this. I would just make a comment that in Southwest Washington, it worked well. Funding was separated, and I did not see, I mean, this has to be earmarked specifically if it's a fee in lieu. It's not a general fund item. So I just, Commissioner Calkins, I know you've expressed some frustration on the transportation side. I see this being even more specific than that, and the state laws are around that. You can't just like merge this into the general fund. So,
Okay,
I mean,
that's helpful. I have a concern also about like what city land can have more trees on it, like exactly where. So I do have a concern about that too. It's like, okay, well, you're gonna take out these trees or not plant trees. And so we have this fee in lieu. It's like, where are we gonna put all these trees in the city?
That's part of the exploration of this as well. And that's
Yeah.
why this thing, like Commissioner Ewert is speaking of, you start peeling it back. It seems really simple when you first start talking about it. And then it's not that simple because it has a lot to do with where would these go and where would they be planted? Just globally, I think Public Works is in favor of that. I don't know what the horizon is. Could we fill every square inch of the city public land in 5 years? And where do we go from there? I don't know what that horizon is, and then there may be other opportunities that are presented here as well, which is, is there opportunity to work with ODOT and plant trees along 99E? I mean, these are options that, we haven't thought about, but are there other public lands, state parks? This starts to get into other aspects of this, and then the question is, do we want to plant in those areas that are not technically like city property, but are still achieving an overall purpose and objective?
If I may.
Okay?
So, I mean, this is a great topic. I'm all for it. I'm all for trees. I love trees. I'm native Oregonian. I love trees. What we've run into in the past, and I can think of two really specific examples where this happened. We had a developer come in and he wanted to build a housing development, multi-family thing. And we told him that we would really appreciate, there was a lot of trees on that piece of property, a lot of trees. And we told him that we would really like to have him keep some of those trees. He did not want to. And so he withdrew his application. He logged the site completely bare. And about 6 months later, he came back in and redid the application. Now, we did not have a tree ordinance in place, so we lost all those trees. That was really bad. Another one that we had came in, same type of situation, pretty densely packed tree situation. And we said we'd really like to have those trees stay. Well, he brought in an arborist, and the arborist told us, here's the deal, guys. Those trees are really, really close together. And if we save, their root structure is all together, and it's shallow. And he said, if we save some of those trees, they're gonna fall over. And we pushed it, we saved them, and they fell over. Fortunately, they didn't take out any of the buildings, any of the houses. So I think that the tree thing is really, really good, but we have to be smart. Do we want drought tolerant types of trees? Mm-hmm. Do we want specific types of trees? I mean, the whole east side of 99, not too many years ago, was completely covered with Douglas fir trees, big ones. And so, do we want Doug firs? Do we want what Canby originally was? And I'm all for that, but disease tolerant, drought tolerant. We need to give people some guidelines of what we want. You know, you look at cities like New Orleans, you look at Charleston, South Carolina, you look at some of the towns I've been in Virginia and whatnot. They're known for certain types of trees. So you know, I think that would be probably a bigger claim to fame than just people planting whatever they buy at Al's Farm and Garden. I think that I would really like to see the city council and ourselves look at this, put something in place that gives us a community that we would like to have. It gets really expensive for developers to bring in arborists. Arborists are they're expensive. And I've heard good ones, I've heard bad ones. But and some of their information is good, some of it is almost like a traffic study. So it is, you know, it's a win-lose thing there. But I'm all for tree ordinance. I think the fee in lieu, I do not want to see the fee in lieu spent on hanging baskets down the street or in a park. I'm sorry, but if we're going to do a fee in lieu, if I were a developer and I was doing for trees, then I want you to do it for trees. And
that's
so
fine.
I don't want posy baskets being paid for my fee in lieu for my tree.
We aren't fleshing that out at this point in time.
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of things to look at this. I'm all for it. But I think that, I mean, there's a lot to look at here. And we start, you know, there are certain houses here that have some, and when you look at some of the things that we did years ago, and people, you know, you go into neighborhoods that have trees, they're nice established things. There's also places where people did not take care of the trees, and they just took them down after they were 6-8 inches. They to collect leaves, they didn't want to rake the leaves, so they took the trees down. So what do we do about that? Who monitors that? Where does that go? So I'm all for the tree thing. I think it's an onion. It's got a lot of layers to it. I think we can do this. I think we can be sensible about it. Whether it's a fee in lieu or whatever, I want trees in Canby. And so I hope we continue this discussion, and I hope this time around we can actually put something in place that has some teeth in it.
Well, and to piggyback on that, if we create this list, it needs to be created with the current development within the city. Douglas firs are giant trees. They are not made to be in between people's houses. They are made to be in a forest. There are trees. I had 100-foot Douglas firs in between my house and my neighbor's. There was 30 feet between our houses. That is no place for a 100-foot Douglas fir. If we're going to do this, you really need to, we're going to expound on this a little bit. The trees that are being put into the different areas need to make sense with the area. Otherwise, you're going to plant the tree, and in 30 or 40 years, the tree is going to need to be cut down because it will no longer fit the space in which it's being planted in. That is one of the things that infuriates me the most with landscapes within the city. There was the whole rant and rave online about how the big sequoia trees were cut down over by the Rite Aid. Those sequoia trees were not there when the city first started, like people said. Those trees were planted there when that development was put in. Whoever planted those trees when that development was put in should have been smacked, because it made absolutely no sense to put those sort of trees that close to a driveway in a mobile home park. So if we're going to do guidance on trees, it needs to make sense with what our city consists of as far as setbacks and distance between houses and stuff.
I agree.
Anybody else want to expound on that before we move on to the next question? Okay, fantastic. So Don, what's your next one?
So the next one is, again, another broad topic, which is, and again, not asking for specific unit counts, but looking at baseline thoughts on, this is the tree per acre issue. That's an option. Canopy coverage is an option. Those are both in play here. So, and I'm hoping these are not completely abstract, but like tree unit count per acre versus canopy calculation. And they can be merged, but I would say that tree unit count, to be honest with you, is going to be simpler. We don't have a forester here, and it's not that we can't do the calculation, but I think canopy gets quite complicated versus tree unit count. But I want your thoughts on those. So,
Don,
yeah.
Quick question on that. How does that differentiate from the second topic that we just debated when we had number of trees per property as one of the options, number of tree unit requirements as one of the options? To me, it sounds like kind of the same thing. Is it not the same thing?
It is. I'm just looking for some additional clarity on, you've given the thought process on, no fee in lieu with mitigation. That sets that up. This is more specific about, are there thoughts about methodology for, if we were to have a standard, having a tree unit per acre standard versus a canopy standard, I guess essentially is we're getting down, so like the code would read like, you need to have at least 10 tree units per acre, for example, or you need to have 25 to 30% canopy coverage.
And do those standards exist elsewhere that we can refer to as examples?
There's examples in Southwest Washington on tree units. That's what they used, and they've quantified that. And I think that, for example, City of Vancouver, and this is just their standard, 30 tree units an acre. That's what they're using. Now, if you have several large trees on your property, you may be able to meet that. And that's so that means you've saved those large trees. That is just, again, a standard that I'm throwing out there. That I think part of the challenge is on canopy is, some of the numbers from some of these cities, I'm looking at our own property that we have, and we have tons of trees on our property. I'm not sure if we would meet the standard. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, like 40% on a single family residential lot, it's a lot of canopy. I think we might barely have that on our property, which we love trees and we have them all over our property, fruit trees and all kinds of different varieties, but that is a huge amount. So I'm just, it also kind of becomes challenging, like, I think a unit might be a little more easy to quantify versus, okay, what is the maturity level of that canopy? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? What is the maturity? Is it the maturity of the tree when it's at a certain maturity? Is it wintertime? Is it summertime? It just seems more challenging to me than a straight up unit count.
Okay. So I think Commissioner Jarosh, do you want trees per acre or canopy per acre?
Trees per acre.
Commissioner Ellison?
I don't even know how to answer the question, to be honest with you, because I don't know what they implicate.
So
I don't know
here,
what the implication is.
if I may, let me just say it this way. So if you have a pine tree or a conifer, it is a tall, narrow tree. If you have a maple tree, it is a wide, shorter tree. So if you had an acre of land that had 2 maple trees on it, 2 mature maple trees, you have 2 trees. But maybe 30%, those trees cover 30% of that acre. If you were to try to get the same percentage of coverage for canopy, you would have to plant like 20 conifers to get that same coverage on that acre, because that tree's canopy is much more narrow. So the question is, if you as a landowner are faced with 2 options, do I want to be held to a standard where I have to hit a certain coverage of canopy with either 2 to 40 trees? Or if I'm cutting down 20 trees, do I put 20 trees back on? I think that is the question. Do you prefer using a count per trees per acre or a canopy coverage per acre? Does that make sense?
It does, and is this, I'm assuming, still speaking in terms of new development?
And that's for you to define, but my belief is that is the direction we're discussing right now.
So for me, I would say canopy on new development. And of course, that's going to be subject to what are the daggone trees that we have approved for city installation. I mean, I guess that would weigh a factor into it as well.
Okay. Commissioner Ewert?
Okay. Can you bring up a slide that you had up here? Is that possible?
Which one is
The
that?
last one that showed the picture, the aerial picture of
Aerial?
our
Yeah,
town.
yeah.
Now, while they're finding that, I'm going to say that I'm going to go with canopy. And I realize that Dawn says that that's a little bit harder to manage, but I think in today's day and age, with the types of trees that we know we can plant, I think that in all actuality, what we're looking for is canopy, okay? Now, if you look at our town, and you've got town, city here, this would be an area that has canopy, okay? Now, I know for a fact that the majority of these trees right in here are not conifers. There's a few in here, but most of them are cottonwoods. Of course, we wouldn't want to plant cottonwoods, but they're maples and whatnot. And I can speak for my property. We've got a nice canopy, but we've got maple trees that are out front. It provides a nice canopy. So I've got, what do I got? I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got 6 maple trees that do our front yard. And it gives a nice canopy there. To get that same canopy, if we did conifers, I would have to have, just like Jason said, I'd have to have 24 of them there. And they would be really huge trees, and they would have to be taken out in a certain period of time. So, and there are other varieties. I'm not saying maple is the only, but I think canopy, if we were looking at areas like this is canopy. And I would like to see more canopy in this area and the new areas that we're developing. If you look up here at the golf course, they've got canopy areas that run around in here. So I think personally, I would shoot for canopy. And I think that we can direct that by the type of trees that fall into our bailiwick, our design of trees that we would like to see in town. And so I remember years ago, we had what was it, the Norway maple or something like that for our street trees. Cutesy little trees. They didn't grow really fast. And they were like really narrow and tall and shot up and, they were great, but I can go back in those same neighborhoods now and they're not so great. And we lost a lot of them in the ice storm too. So, I think that I would shoot personally, if I wanted to have what Canby is going to look like, I would shoot for canopy. Canby canopy.
Okay. Commissioner Calkins?
Well, I think Commissioner Ewert's impassioned presentation has changed my mind. I will say canopy as well. I was thinking the other way might be easier, but I would agree with that. I have some things to probably say off these points that are kind of intertwined with this, but I'll save that to the end.
Okay. For me, I would go with trees per acre, and I'm a fan for more trees smartly, so trees that are more columnar in nature, so you have more units per acre that go up a little higher to sequester more carbon, rather than one tree that is gigantic that's going to end up getting limbed up because it's sprawling over people's houses or that sort of thing. So that's why I'm choosing trees per acre. Okay, next question, Don.
I think that this kind of gets into the specifics of types of trees that would be probably in a special category and with some emphasis on them. That could be, and again, I know what you just said, Jason, about Douglas fir trees, but like large trees, let's say they're oak instead of Douglas fir. Maybe specifically white oak, but like preserving trees that are state sensitive species, preserving trees that are possibly, although there's only one heritage tree, but let's say there becomes another one. Should we be looking at those items as well?
Okay, so the questions are tree preservation, emphasis on tree preservation for target species, yes or no? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, Commissioner Commissioner Jarosh.
Yes.
Commissioner Ellison.
Yes.
Commissioner Ewert.
Yes.
Commissioner Calkins.
Yes.
I am a yes, as long as the tree is healthy.
Great.
Next question.
And this is, I'm not sure if we can dive into this level tonight. If there's other, we kind of touched on it already, so I'm going to pass that one. Exempt, maybe we'll go to the exempt type developments and then we'll go to street trees. Let's go to exempt type of developments. Thoughts on what type of developments should be exempt. One example would be hazard trees. Obviously, you don't want those. Are there other thoughts on what kind of developments or removal should be exempt?
Okay, so hold on a second. So are we talking about developments or are we talking about tree characteristics? Because when I hear developments, I hear, are we going to make an exception for an industrial development? Are we going to make an exception for public development? Are we going to does that make sense?
It does, and let's start with that, and it's actually both, and that would be the other, let's dive into that first, and then the other would be the specifics of the species itself. So let's do developments first.
So what developments, what is the litany of developments?
So I would say like affordable housing might be one. Are there areas where we would lessen these restrictions?
Okay, so affordable housing, industrial,
Yep.
residential, commercial, public lands. Does that sound like a good list?
It does.
Commissioners, do you feel that that is a semi-comprehensive list to go from? Okay, so write this down. So we have, these are the particular developments. The first question will be, should there be any exceptions, yes or no? And if yes, off the top of your head, what developments should get an exemption? Affordable housing, industrial, residential, commercial, or public lands. Does that all make sense to everybody? Sorry if I'm being a super taskmaster tonight. I want to make sure that we're not here till 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay, Commissioner Jarosh, take it away.
I would say yes, that affordable housing should be exempt or something different, especially because they're often tall and skinny and zero lot lines, and you can't put much of a canopy in there. Maybe you could put a skinny tall tree in the front yard, but you're not going to get anything wide. So yeah, that, to me, affordable housing could have exemption.
Okay, Commissioner Ellison?
No exemptions.
Okay, Commissioner Ewert?
All right. I'm going to say that we keep it out of commercial and industrial. Residential, yes. I'm not exactly sure what the affordable housing versus multifamily, I say yes on both of those. And residential, yes.
Yes, you want to give residential an exemption?
No. I'm sorry. I'm framing this wrong. Exception for industrial and commercial, no exception for the other ones. Is that the way we want that? I think that's
Yes.
what I wanted. Okay. I want to see trees and, I don't want to see trees in commercial and industrial. I don't think we need to mandate that. I mean, street
Okay.
trees are fine, but they're just going to be in the way.
Okay, Commissioner Calkins?
No exemptions.
Okay. I am for no exemptions, but I think each development category should have requirements that fit that category. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, let me know when you're ready, Don.
So the last one, I would say street trees, credits for street trees. Well, I guess they would automatically, it would come down to like, are we counting street trees as part of the canopy or tree units, depending on what the direction we're going in? Because there's, again, a split there. But either option, are we going to give any credit for street trees as counting for canopy or units, tree units?
Okay, so the question is, are we going to give folks credit for street trees? Yes or no? Commissioner Jarosh,
No.
Commissioner Ellison.
Again, just to clarify, this is with new developments, or are we talking existing old homes?
Well, I'm assuming the new development. That's my assumption.
And then just again, the question is, do we give them credit?
So like, let's say, for example, some jurisdictions might give, for the trees that you're planting, street trees, you're getting, if there is a unit count, you get half the credit for whatever unit count that was for those trees. If you plant 10 trees in front of your property, you get credit for 5 if it's a unit count. If it was a canopy count and coverage, you would get whatever the crown of that tree is based on the species.
And who, I know this is dumb.
Plant as many.
Right, no, I get that, but who's responsible for them if they're street trees? Is it the owner or is it the
Well,
city?
ultimately, the city is, once they're planted to city standards, but yeah, they need to be planted by the developer.
Okay. So in other words, there's maybe a higher likelihood that we may see them year over year as opposed to after 2 years.
Yeah, they should theoretically live in the sense that we're taking them on as a city, yes, yeah.
I guess in that case, yeah, I would be for credit in that instance. But you're saying in all the aforementioned categories, correct?
Say that
You're applying that street tree credit into all these aforementioned categories,
Exactly,
right?
depending on where it ends up, it would be credited at some level, yes.
So in the case of Mr. Ewert's suggestion in commercial or what have you, they could get credit toward their development by putting those out in the street or in the median between the lanes or something like that. Is that what we're saying?
If Commissioner Ewert's suggestion for exemption for commercial and industrial occurs, I doubt we're going to
wouldn't
give
matter.
credit for street trees. We're going
Yeah,
to mandate
it wouldn't
them.
matter.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Sorry.
Okay, Commissioner Ewert.
We already have a street tree ordinance. I don't want to mess with that. I do not want to include it in this discussion. This discussion, I believe, is related to existing trees and saving those and adding to our tree count moving forward on real estate that is not street. So we've got a street tree ordinance. We have that dialed in. It works. I like it. It works good. This, what we're talking about here, in my opinion, is for the real estate that sits outside the street, other side of the sidewalk.
So your answer is no.
My answer is no. We keep the street trees the way they are, and if you
Okay.
want to get credit for putting in really beautiful trees on your property and it works, then so be it.
Okay, Commissioner Gawkins?
I'll say no.
Excellent, I'm no. Don, next question.
That was really all we had for tonight on questions, and this really is helpful to start to frame this more and to drill it down. I think that's enough for us to, Emma, did you have anything?
Do we want to ask about downtown, an exemption for downtown?
Oh, yeah, that's great. Trees in the downtown area. I guess that's another question is, downtown is a unique environment. Obviously, street trees are part of that interface. It's pretty difficult to meet the standards for zero lot line and floor area ratio in downtown environments and plant trees on your property. In fact, they may not coexist together, but our thought on that would be exemptions for downtown tree requirements, because the idea is you're densifying the downtown building up to the sidewalk with your building covering aspirationally every square inch of your property. Does that?
So to that point, Don, and if any of I'm just going to jump in here. If any of the commissioners disagree with me, please speak up. But I think it goes back to whether we're going to grant exemptions to different development types. And I had mentioned we should tailor the requirements per the development type. There would essentially be a downtown development type, and that would have a corresponding tree requirement for that space. Does that make sense?
That totally does to me, and I just pointing that out, and that was a great add by Emma. I think it's, if we can specifically identify where that applies, if you have comfort as commissioners on that, that would be where I think we would want to go as staff, because we see it as challenging to, there's already a vision for what that's supposed to be, and planting trees is probably impractical with the code standards as they currently exist. It's not achievable. You can't have the trees and the building where you're covering the whole lot.
Sure. So to that effect, I don't want to railroad anybody, but is that, fellow commissioners, do you feel that makes sense, or do you have a different opinion?
Makes sense.
Sounds good.
Good.
Okay.
And Commissioner Padden, or Chair Padden, that's really the extent of our list for tonight. I think that the next piece here is for staff is we're going to take your comments, consolidate them. I don't have an exact timeline. I'll report out on our numerous other items that are between now and the end of the year. Obviously, this getting before council would be an important element of this. I also see this as a continuation of a conversation into the comprehensive plan, as I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, moving this forward. I feel it's important that we have a continuation of the dialogue here. We do want council involved in this. I am assuming that we're going to have some assessment of trees no matter what as part of the comprehensive plan. How that gets implemented in terms of going forward is another question. But to that extent, I would assume as well that the consultants that we hire will be doing some evaluation of trees as well as part of the comprehensive plan.
Okay. If I may, I'd like to take a temperature of the rest of the commission. So before we went down this list, we had started with Commissioner Jarosh of sharing her thoughts on this. What I would like to do is give everybody a fair and equal opportunity to be able to share their thoughts. As far as anything that isn't related to what we covered in this, as far as the questions that we had, if there was any research or anything that any other of the commissioners had done to kind of share their thoughts and feed into this that aren't necessarily related to the list that we went through. Does that make sense for everybody? Don?
Yes, that makes sense to me.
Okay. So Commissioner Jarosh, real quick, did you have anything else you wanted to add to before we moved to that section?
One thing real quickly, it just came up through the conversation is just in general, I struggle a bit with if we're going to have a new ordinance, whether it's a sign ordinance, a fence ordinance, or tree ordinance, why would we not want to apply it to existing properties? But they're grandfathered in, just like any other ordinance. We don't need to talk about that now, but maybe next time is when do we and when don't we, you know? That's all. Thanks.
Okay. And just so folks know, I'll go down through my list here, and then we'll do one more pass through in case something came up while other folks were sharing their thoughts, so that way nobody's left out. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to Commissioner Ellison.
I have nothing more at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Ewert.
The only thing I would like to say is I'd like to be part of this discussion moving forward with the city council. Before we put this thing into stone, it would be great to be part of that discussion. So other than that, I think we've covered it.
Excellent. Commissioner Calkins.
Yeah, I have a question and then some comments. So I am unfamiliar. I guess I could have looked this up earlier, but what exactly does a city forester do for myself and maybe the people, the tens of hundreds of people watching at home?
Yeah, great question. The city forester, in terms of how that really works in many jurisdictions, is they're responsible essentially for inspecting the trees. They go out and they do the individual inspections. They permit process. In many jurisdictions is handled by the forester through that process. They're responsible for managing if there's a fee in lieu. That's their responsibility in figuring out what's going on with that situation. I'd say monitoring canopy, all those elements that go with that. So it's a pretty responsible position and a pretty powerful position in many jurisdictions. We don't have a person like that. Public Works is really taking on the responsibility if somebody doesn't. That would be one ad that Public Works would like to do, is they'd like developers to be planting street trees themselves instead of, because you currently can pay the Public Works Department to plant street trees, but the Public Works, that was one thing I forgot to mention, was they would like to get out of the business of planting trees for developments. They'd rather have the developer do that. But the forester's job is essentially to make sure that the tree ordinance is implemented and basically enforced. That's their job.
No, thank you.
And that would be, and we touched on it, and I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but there are circumstances when you have a tree ordinance where you have to include the need for an arborist. We are not there tonight. I don't want to go there tonight, but I've been in circumstances on the other side as a consultant and going through and having to get arborists involved to say, is that tree healthy or not? And those are the kinds of things, or the wind blow thing that was mentioned earlier, because it does get somewhat complicated on this, that you want it to also be safe as well.
So that's good. So then I'll add that to, and some of these other things to maybe future discussion. But, I feel like we're going to do this, and that we all agree that trees are important to the city of Canby and to our environment. And, if there was consensus, recommending to council that we believe there should be, I think staff runs too lean. We're adding more work with the fences and everything, and having someone like a forester, an arborist, or someone who can take a look at some of these things might be needed. The other thing in conjunction with that, again, back to when we were first starting to talk about the fences, and I felt very strongly about that too. Things like this, when we add these codes and we fix the codes, it only really works if the code is enforced. And we still have this complaint-based part-time code enforcement setup. And I feel like we need some we'll need some code enforcement to this for the new developments going in, the types of trees, everything we just talked about. We can't just set up the code and cross our fingers that they're going to do the right thing, because we've seen with the fences that that's not the case. And it'll be the same with the trees, unfortunately, if we don't have this. I think also, along with code enforcement too, and a forester is looking at invasive species that are being allowed to grow and destroy the environment. Also, code enforcement around areas where trees are destroying the sidewalk and causing hazards that are over power lines. I think this should be a big part of the discussion, is trees around the power lines that haven't been, I know they're undergrounding South Ivy, but the ice storm came and took out the power. We're going to be having another ice storm at some point. And in branches that are trees that are under and around power lines, and are those being managed and maintained so that we don't lose power during a crisis, I think is going to be a huge piece of this too. And I think that covers just all that I had left. Yes, thank you.
Okay. For me, I echo some of the other folks' emphasis that there needs to be a way to deal with unsafe, declining, and damaged trees, that they are allowed to be taken down. I think there also needs to be encouragement of people who have these sort of trees on their property to get them taken down. One of the things, as a horticulturist, it pains me to no end to walk around this town and see all of these trees, like dogwoods and fir trees and stuff, that were badly damaged in the ice storm and are clearly not healthy trees, to remain up. And all that does is those trees get more and more unhealthy, and they start to send out the pheromones that encourage insects and pests to come in. And once those trees are infested and killed, then they go on to the more healthier trees. We need to take a holistic look at our trees and our plants and all of that in the city, and we need to somehow form a way to partner with citizens and developers and landowners to make the entire flora system within the city A, make sense, and B, make sure that it's healthy and doing what it's supposed to be doing. As far as the city not having a forester or an arborist, if we start, as you said, Don, if we are charging permitting fees or something along those lines, or we're charging fees for these things, and that money has to go towards that program, it would make sense that we can either use that money to help fund an arborist, whether it's partially with parks and partially with the city, or whether we subcontract that out. There are arborists and foresters that you can, services that you can contract with to do that. In fact, I was chatting with a gentleman that does that over at the Safeway Plaza a few weeks ago, and that's what he does. He contracts with these developers, and he goes into shopping centers and stuff and does reports and grades the trees, and then gives a report to the landowners. I really think that if we're charging fees, we need to be able to use them for other things. As I said, as far as the health of trees, it's not just trees that are going to get us across the finish line. Flowers like echinaceas, the perennials, those sort of things need to be encouraged as well. Those are the ones that help the actual pollinators and those things that we need as part of this whole process as well. So I really think we need to not only put an emphasis on trees, but like I said, we need to put an emphasis on a holistic approach to improving the vegetation within the city so it makes sense. And to that point, that ties me back in, and I'm going to beat this drum again. We need to create a list of smart trees. It makes absolutely no sense for someone to put a cottonwood in their yard. If they have a cottonwood, they need to be encouraged to take that out and put in something that is more, that makes more sense for that space. It does no good to emphasize planting trees and then plant a bunch of trees that in 20 years are just going to be cut down again. And if that's the case, then if we want to go down that road, we need to really look at the phasing of these trees to say, okay, if you plant these trees, we recommend that you then plant these trees so that when these ones come down, these other ones will come in after that. Because that's where Canby is right now. A lot of these trees that were planted back in the day are huge and no longer fit the site. And so that's why a lot of these people are cutting them down. It pained me dearly to cut down the 2 big Douglas firs that I had, but one of them had a cavitated top that was about 10 feet down, and I did not want it to go sticking through mine or my neighbor's roof. I took those trees down and I planted about 15 small and fastigiated or dwarf plants in their place because that makes sense for my area. So I think we need to, when we do this list, it needs to be smart and it needs to be tailored to the development that these trees are going into. And it's guidelines. People can pick the trees from the list. They don't have to do it, but it's all about educating people on what's going to work and what's not going to work in these areas. So those are my thoughts. Is there one last pass for anything that's been said that floats to the mind of the other commissioners? Anybody? Holy cow, that was awesome. I think we got through that. Don, I don't know about you. I thought we could really get in the weeds on this, but I think all in all, everybody did a great job with staying on task and not talking about expanding to plant trees on the moon. I think it worked real well.
There will be other opportunities for the deeper dive.
Yes.
I think it was Emma's presence kept us on task. Didn't want to look foolish in front of the new person.
What?
It was Emma's presence tonight that caused us to stay on focus.
Yeah, we wanted to stay on task in front of the new staff member.
Well, then buckle up, Emma, because that's wait till next time.
Can't wait.
Okay, so with that, if there's nothing else on that, we'll go ahead and close the one last pass. Don, did you have any other questions or comments?
No, this was great. Thank you. Very appreciated. I think it's timely. As we get further into this, there'll be opportunities on, I don't know what these committees are going to look like, but they will exist that will be diving into some of this stuff. It may not just be this one topic. There may be other issues related to the environment, et cetera. That has not been sorted, but just to let you know that's coming.
Excellent. And I would say for the future, if we do something like this, you kind of had some questions, yes, no sort of things. I would say in the future, maybe, flesh them out in advance and then have the slide say, here's the question, and have that sort of, if like the parameters, that way we don't have to necessarily make it up on the fly, and it helps keep us cats all in the same line.
So noted.
Excellent. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll go back into our agenda items with Planning Director updates.
Chair Patton, just a few. The next Planning Commission is September 26th. Canby Center is on the agenda for that evening. The following October 10th, there is a annexation and rezone. It's called Redwood annexation, but it's also the territorial apartments, but it's only the annexation and rezone. The apartments will come back through design review later, presuming council approves the annexation and rezone. Those are upcoming hearing items, and just a few other things that you all will be involved with. September 21st, there's a joint planning commission city council meeting on parklets. That staff report is being developed as we speak. So that's up and coming. On parklets for downtown as well as within commercial shopping areas, there's kind of two scenarios. One is taking parking in commercial shopping areas for outdoor seating, as well as parklets in situations where the discussion is around removing parking. And we've taken your previous comments, and those are going to be kind of formed in discussion about comments council's already said and comments you've already said, commonalities between the two, and then also the areas where you, as the planning commission, have not had, you had separate thoughts on that. So that's coming up on September 21. There'll be an update on October 19th for the Planning Commission and City Council. Again, another work session, Housing and Economic Opportunity Assessment update. This has to do with where we're going with the comprehensive plan, the transportation system plan, and most importantly, the urban growth boundary needs that are being identified by our consulting team for a 20-year planning horizon. Not surprising, the acknowledged, from the acknowledged 1984 comprehensive plan that we need additional land. If we're looking at a 37 or 38-year-old comprehensive plan boundary, some of those decisions will be made by council, but it will at least be identified on acreage that's needed going forward. And that's the beginning of that discussion that starts to lead us into the comprehensive plan update. The topic of fencing was discussed to some extent tonight. That fencing work session will have another one. Ryan Potter will be coming back. That's likely on November 14th, but it may end up being on October 24th. I need to talk to Ryan about that. That's another item for a work session. The Housing Advisory Committee, this is just a note of information, Housing Advisory Committee is meeting on September 27th. The Economic Advisory Committee is meeting on September 29th. And again, on the comprehensive plan, we're anticipating that we'll have consultant selection and scope approval on November 16th by the City Council. We're also, there's another work session that's with council on Special Area J that's coming up November 2nd. That's in light of the comprehensive plan again, in light of Walnut Street extension, in light of the fact that that area was looked at in 2005 as a concept plan but never adopted, and then going forward with the comprehensive plan and addressing the thoughts around that area in terms of being a mixed-use area, which is what it's currently identified as in our comprehensive plan, but not definitively identified in terms of land use categories. So that's another discussion item that's happening as well. So we're kind of like really packed getting up to the end of the year. I don't know what December completely looks like, but there's a lot on the horizon here near term.
Don, I'm really confused on some of these. So
Yeah.
we've got on 9/26, we've got Canby Center. That's one of our
Yep.
normal planning commission nights.
Yep.
On 10/10, which is a normal planning commission night, we have the annexation and rezone.
Yes.
On 9/21, we have a joint meeting with council for parklets.
Yes.
Then you mentioned 9/19, which is a Monday. What, are we having a meeting on that Monday?
Actually, that might be my mistake on that date. It's the next council,
The next council meeting?
well, it's October, so is October 19th a Monday?
Yes.
Okay,
I
so
have
it's-
something down here, a joint planning commission council meeting on October 5th.
Okay, October 19th is actually a Wednesday, which is the.
Oh, October 19th.
Yes.
I thought you said September 19th.
No, October 19th. So that is a
10/19.
joint housing and economic opportunity assessment, planning commission, city council meeting.
Okay, okay, that's on the calendar here.
Okay.
And then you said 9/14, there was something, or,
So I don't have,
fences, when was fences
oh, sorry,
possibly?
fences, yeah. Fences will either be November 14th or October 24th.
11, 14, or 10. Okay, okay.
I'll send an email out with all this. This is a lot. I know I'm throwing dates out and it's all swirling kind of, but let me send that out so you guys
Okay.
have all these dates down. I mean, there's a lot of stuff kind of at the year end that's happening.
That's fine. It's the full court press. We gotta make this fruit salad. We gotta get it to them. Ambrosia.
Okay.
No aspects though. We don't want to send any aspects to council. That would probably not go over very well.
We're just enjoying your commentary. So,
See, the nice thing is I'm in Grants Pass, so no one can throw anything at me from this distance. So it helps.
I think that's probably enough for tonight. So I'll send out an email so you guys are all up to speed on this. There'll be more discussions. Jason, I know there's another list that you and I are going to get together on, and I'm happy to have that discussion as well on code updates. So looking forward to that.
Okay. So anything else from you, Don?
That was it.
Okay, so moving on to our fourth item, which is items of interest from the planning commission. I'll let the other commissioners go first. Do you have anything you'd like to add for the good of the order? Any projects, any questions?
I have one quick one. So the next housing meeting, I got an email from Jamie, but I haven't seen anything advertised anywhere yet. And that was something that came up last time. Do we know what the plans are for getting it out on social media or getting signs put out? Or?
Let me check with her on that.
Okay. That went wild on social media and on Nextdoor. There was a huge thread on Nextdoor about not knowing when these meetings are and not having enough notice. So that's something the
Gotcha.
city probably should take a look at.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
And to that point, I will just let the commission know that at the city council goal setting session, there was talk of perhaps it's time that the city hire a communications director or someone who is their sole responsibility is communications like this, rather than having Jamie, the economic developer, and Eric do these sort of things. And it sounded like the city council was going to expedite that. So I think that will play into this larger problem as far as filling that gap. Anything else from other commissioners? Okay, for me, I just want to say welcome, Emma, to the planning department. We are glad to have you on board, and I hope that you come to as many meetings as possible because they're always a hoot. With that, I did want to just touch on what Don was mentioning about this list, just so it's out there for the record. We've talked about this before, but the city council and the mayor sent Don and I a list of items, like a bubble list of items that the council has been building about different codes and different things they would like to see changed. The list is quite old. And so Don and I are going to be sitting down and looking through the list and identifying things that have been taken care of with the work that we have done, which, by the way, we have done a lot of work. And, myself and I think the citizens, whether they realize it or not, are appreciative of that. Things that we are currently working on and will be taken care of with future changes that we are currently working on. Things that we have no business dealing with and need to be just taken off the list, and things that we need to add to the bubble or continue to keep on the list and then prioritize where they will fit in. So those are those things. And then something that I will be bringing up is there was a discussion about the new mass timber thing, and I want to talk to Don about where we stand as far as our codes allowing for mass timber use within our city. So that is what I plan on covering, just to make sure everything's transparent. Those are the things that I plan on chatting with Don about in October. So we've got some time for that because both of our calendars are pretty packed. So that's it for me. Any questions on that or anything else for the good of the order? Oh my gosh, what time is it? Whew, it's 8. That's not bad. Okay. So our last item on the agenda is adjournment. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Ellison, seconded by Commissioner Drosch to adjourn tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. It is unanimous. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all, Canby, for tuning in, and for our one folk in the audience. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.